Regarding testing, how would you mock the Open API requests?
Same thing. Um, it would be a lot more code, but it's the same. It's the same. Well, I guess. I guess there's a lot of ways you can do it. Actually, let me show you. So, Vitis has like so many ways to do mocking. There's not just one way. I just mocked out the whole module, but because the way LangChain does its imports, I guess that could be kind of weird. So you could just mock it out on a per function basis. Let me see if they have an example of that. Not that. You could do, not that. There we go. So you can do like a spy.mock implement once to literally look at specific functions. You can do v.function to mock an implementation, like a specific function like this. So there's a lot of ways you could do it. You probably could just mock out the whole module too, like we did in the test. And then what you could do is just do this part right here. You see where I'm mocking out the entire module, but these are the only methods that I'm stubbing. So you could, for the OpenAI one, if you go to AI, the place in which we're calling OpenAI would be model.call. So if you look at the call, that comes from model. Model comes from OpenAI. OpenAI comes from this path. So you could just mock this whole path out and then stub this OpenAI to be a class that returns something with a call method on it that does nothing. So like I said, it's just a lot more code, but that's how you would do it.
And a little bit more generally speaking with testing, what else in this app would you want to test?
What would I want to test? So I wouldn't be testing any of the content on the page because I'd probably be using a CMS and the data will be dynamic anyway. So I wouldn't be testing that. I would probably test to see that certain elements are on the page though, because certain elements mean certain components were loaded up. So I would be testing that. Like, for instance, I might test that loading animation spinner for autosave is there and not take it away. I will test anything that has a conditional, which is a branch. So anything with a branch, I want to test to make sure that we handled that conditional. So I would try to throw different things at inputs to see those conditionals. That can be, that could be something like a conditional in the JSX. That could be something like this, where the button is changing. So I was like, oh, okay, I'm gonna make a new mock, make user ID there for one, test it to make sure it's journal, and then mock it out to where user ID is not there and test to see if that says new user, right? So I'll test each conditional like that. Anywhere there's logic. I'm not so concerned about just pure rendering. I'm only concerned if there's logic. So like pretty much anywhere there's like interpolating, I will be like looking in here. So I'll test that. I'll test like if there's like a map in here. Anywhere there's interpolation, I'm going to test. Everything else, I'm not testing for. It's really not worth it. You don't want to go and just like, all right, 2 string equals this 2 string and like see if these 2 strings I guess that's what snapshot testing is. But yeah, I would do that. And then obviously the easy one is just all these utilities. These have nothing to do with React, and they're just plain old JavaScript functions that you can test no problem. So all these should be tested. And then I would probably test the APIs because these are also very easy to test. They're just functions. You can stub out everything that's passed to them. So this is literally just a function. You can stub out any one of these. It's pure node. Even a request object that came in here, you could just pass that in yourself and stub it out. So I would test that. You can spy on these next responses to see what information they got back to make sure it's correct. Yeah, that's probably everything I would test.
I'll piggyback on that with we just released a couple weeks ago an enterprise UI development course. That the context of the course is maintaining a very large code base, but it covers everything testing related to that, from component to integration to mocking and spying. And so if you're interested in just testing in general, that's another great new course that we released.
Yep. Cool. Any other questions?
Regarding responsive design, you didn't use the Tailwind classes, but can you speak briefly to how you would approach responsive design with Tailwind? Is it easier to use those classes from the beginning, or kind of stub everything out like you have now and then add the classes in after?
Yeah, I think if you're going to do responsive design, you should make it mobile first. So all the classes you use are meant to be on mobile, and then you add classes going up. I think if you add classes going down, it's so much harder to do that, in my opinion. So if I were to make this responsive from day one, like for instance, this page, like I think some people are like, okay, I'm gonna go in here, but like for a small screen, which is how you do this in Tailwind, I'm gonna do this thing. I wouldn't do it that way. All of this CSS, all these classes here would be for a phone by default. And then I'm like, okay, now for a desktop where it's large, then I would add like, a different width here or something. I would change it on the way up. So that's how I would do it if I was gonna do it with Tailwind. Much easier going up than down. Yep.
I have more of a general question. When you're coming up with a project like this, do you kind of have a process? Do you come up with the idea first and then find the technology, or are you poking around in the technology and then the idea develops?
Yeah, that's a good question. So I mean, with these technologies, so I usually try not to teach anything that I'm not constantly using and super passionate about. So it's always just on my mind about, the thing that I'm teaching. So with Next.js and anything AI related, that's just what I've just been using forever. And as far as like the idea, I don't really have a process. I think it's more like what do I think people would like making? Like what sounds cool? And the only thing that I try to scope it off of is like, is it teachable? Because there's like really a lot of things that I can just sit up here and just make, but it wouldn't be a good experience for anyone just to watch me just struggle through Google, like looking up things. So I have to make sure that like it's teachable and it's like building on something. So that's like the only filter that I have. But yeah, really, I do have like I guess if I think about it, if I really thought about it, there's like things I try to stay away from, which are like for instance, I try to stay away from apps that aren't impressive unless you have a bunch of data. Like for instance, if I was just like, let's rebuild Twitter, that sounds cool, but unless you have a bunch of tweets on the page, it's pretty bad. Or unless it's like, hey, we're all using the same server and we can see each other's tweets. It's really not that fun. It's social by nature. So if we can't demonstrate that social aspect, it's really not that impressive. So I try to stay away from multiplayer social experiences because they're not that impressive unless you're doing it together. So it mostly lands on like productivity type things because most productivity apps are like solo, where you can just do your own thing. Maybe it's better with people, but you could totally do it. You can work on Notion by yourself. So it's usually that. And then I do also tend to make sure that the app, as far as like the features that it has, are very simple. And then I just expand on top of that because I think it's those things in between that you would need to know as like an engineer having a job. Like I think it's really cool to like, oh, I built this AI feature. But what's better is that you understand authentication and you understand how these things in between these features work, because every single app are gonna have these features in between. They're gonna have the table stakes, right? Like it doesn't matter what app you make. You're gonna need routing, you're gonna need testing, you're gonna need components, you're gonna need data fetching, you're gonna need caching. So I like to focus on those things and just sprinkle like features in that aren't really unique or that are unique to the app, but you probably won't see in any other app because it's just too unique for this. So that's just kind of my thought process.